Welcome to Image Bearers, episode 19. My name is Atoma. I'm really honored today to have with us Dr. Tim Sumerlin. Dr. Tim is an awesome disciple. He will share a little bit about himself. But I wanted Tim to come on the program because I feel like, I know for myself personally, I feel like I'm very bad at comforting people when there is a loss in their family or a friend may have passed away. And I think this is probably common for a lot of people, where the thing we want to do is just either be quiet and leave them alone, or bombard them like the first day we hear about it and don't do anything after that. And so Tim, I think, has some really great insights for us. So just a few things about Mr. Tim, Dr. Tim. Dr. Tim has served in the International Church of Christ for 38 years in various ministries. As an elder in the Denver Church of Christ, he has built a team of trained counselors to work on a variety of settings. Along with teaching Christian counseling classes, he leads grief recovery groups and the Disciples in Motion ministry, as well as serving as a dean of the counseling at the Rocky Mountain School of Ministry and Theology. He also teaches graduate classes at the University of Denver. In 2009, Tim completed his doctoral in education and counseling at Colorado State University and earned his PhD. And he has a passion just to really make sure we're doing well in terms of responding to grief and helping those who are going through grief in our churches. So with that, gonna go ahead and get started. Again, thanks so much for being on the show.
Thanks, Atoma. I'm really excited about being with you today. It's been good to meet you.
Good to meet you too. We'll definitely be getting more time, I'm sure. So the first question I have is, what are some ways that we can help people who are going through the loss of a loved one?
Well, Atoma, that seems to be the big question, is what do I say? What do I do? How do I help somebody else out? And there's a couple of things that come to my mind. I mean, I talk about this all the time in workshops and such. And, you know, I've done all the dumb things myself. This is not easy work. And but there's some things that are really important, I believe. First of all, I think we need to be comfortable with our own grief. You know, our culture, most cultures around the world don't allow men to cry and get in touch with grief. And so many of us come to this game with a lot of unresolved issues on our own. So in our church in Denver, one of the things when people come through the grief group, I tell them that you become a pioneer of compassion. In other words, when you go through your own grief in a successful way, you're able to help other people much more effectively. I led grief groups for years in the school setting, but it wasn't until my mom died that I was able to really feel like I'd gone through my own grief issues. And it really radically changed how I approached other people. So that's one thing I'd say is, you know, make sure for yourself you're doing the hard work. I tell disciples all the time that, listen, Jesus did this stuff. John chapter 11 with Lazarus, you read that story through the eyes of grief. I mean, Jesus walked right into that situation. He emotionally engaged in it. The Bible actually says Jesus wept. And I tell people that's different than crying. You know, crying, you can kind of control your crying a bit. You know when to stop crying or whatever, but not weeping. Weeping is uncontrolled crying. And Jesus himself allowed himself to experience his grief and cry uncontrollably in front of people. And that's impressive. And if we're disciples of his, then that's the way we should think and feel, is the way he did. So that's the first thing, is give yourself permission to undergo your own grief. And then the second thing is that, you know, Romans 12:12 says, mourn with those who mourn. And it was interesting, this past weekend, I flew to Indianapolis for my father-in-law's, his wife passed away. And, you know, we went in to support him and the family. And it was really interesting. My wife and I were talking, how do we help, you know, him, and what do you say and all that. And what I told her, I said, you know, the best thing we can do is give him space to mourn by us mourning with him. So it's really interesting. We walked into the church, and we had the pre-service where it's just the family members, and they had an open casket, and he was up there, looking at his wife in the casket, and my wife was ready to walk up to help him and comfort him, and I said, let him mourn for a while. Let him stand there and have a space to simply mourn. And the problem is we want to fix things. I
Right.
tell the students that I work with, I said, I cannot fix your grief. I'm sorry. I'll walk with you. I'll walk next to you, but I can't fix this. And that's one of the things we have to get comfortable with, is we have to be comfortable with the idea that grief is for every human being. It's just part of what we're all about. And all of us are going to be going through this. And in our churches, particularly, there's a big crop of us that are, we were all converted back in the 70s and 80s, and
Yeah.
we're all getting into our 60s and 70s now, and we're going to be losing each other. I mean, now we're losing our parents a lot and maybe some siblings, but we're going to start losing each other every single day. I mean, there's going to be almost daily to weekly losses in our churches.
Mhm.
So we have to get good at just allowing people to mourn. So I got some things I'll share later on if you want me to, about some specific things to say or not to say. But those are two things I think that are important, is make sure you go through your own, and then give people space to mourn.
Okay. So I guess, I think I'm very self-conscious. So I don't feel like I really get in touch with my emotions myself to be able to grieve with things that may be going in my life. So I feel like I'm not qualified in a sense to be able to help others who are going through their grief. So is any part of your counseling, or is there anything you could recommend for people who might be like myself, who are like, I need to do a better job of getting in touch with my own grief?
Sure. Yeah. A good question. Let me give a shameless plug for my book. It's called The Grief Journey, and what it does, it's available at IPI, and I go to all these churches to do this workshop. But
Do you have
well,
one handy real quick you can show us? If it's far away, don't worry about it.
oh, I got it. Hold on a second. I just happened to bring one upstairs.
Okay.
Um,
I thought I could see it from there. That's a different.
yeah, there you go. Oh,
Okay.
so it's called The Grief Journey,
Okay.
and it's really interesting. It's part of the book is just on grief itself, the content of grief. But most of the book is a journaling activity that you're going to do, and it's going to walk you through the grief journey for a person that you're grieving. And this is what we use in our groups. People can do it individually, but we typically do these in group settings because we kind of need to be around each other. And it'll walk you through your own grief, and it'll really help you kind of settle down a little bit and grieve the way we're supposed to grieve it. Instead of ignoring it, we engage it like Jesus did. So it's
Okay.
called The Grief Journey. I think it's a great way for any of us. I've used it for both my parents. It's a great way for any of us to get better in touch with what we're going through.
Okay. So you mentioned a little bit earlier there's some things to do and not to do. Can you kind of cover some of those?
Absolutely. Well, you mentioned something a minute ago that I thought was really good. Timing's super important. So, like you said, somebody dies and everybody supports the heck out of the family. You're taking dinners over there, you send cards. I mean, for the first week or two, that person is super supportive. What I do is I wait for a couple of weeks, because what happens is after 2 weeks, everybody goes home, everybody goes back to work, and you're going to wake up in the morning and go, I'll never see my mom again. And that's usually about 3 weeks in. And it hits you like an avalanche that I'm never going to see this person again. And that's when people start needing support. So what I do is I wait for a little while, and I'll initiate with that brother or sister or my friend a few weeks into it. And then I'd say, listen, can I take you out for a cup of coffee or whatever? And I'll listen to you. I want to hear your story.
Just to
And
interrupt, I think one of the things you mentioned before, when I think I heard one of your presentations, was to not say, please get back to me if there's anything I can do for you, because that's just not, it's better to initiate, like you did.
yeah, that's another one. But just, to give people a safe and confidential space to start talking. That helps people almost more than anything. Is if you take them somewhere, you don't want to do this in fellowship where you just kind of walk by, hey, how you doing? You want to take them somewhere to Starbucks or whatever, and create an environment where you can listen for 2 hours or so and give and just ask questions like, tell me about your mom. What was your mom like? And what do you
Mhm.
miss the most about her? How did your mom make you laugh and love? And, just getting people to talk. That is another thing we do, though. A lot of times at a funeral, you'll walk past a person and you'll say, I'm really sorry about your loss. If I can do anything for you, let me know, right?
Right.
And we do that with a good open heart and everything, but it's never effective. I've never heard anybody call me back and say, hey, I need this. They just never do. So I tell people, instead of doing that, find out something that person needs. So for example, if a woman loses her husband and she's got 3 kids at home, I might walk up to her and say, I'm really sorry that this has happened to you. I tell you what I'd like to do is I'd like to come over on Wednesday night. I'll pick up your 3 kids. I'm going to take them to McDonald's for a couple hours, and you've just got the evening off by yourself. Would that work for you?
Hmm.
And so I thought through kind of like what would work for her. And
Right.
maybe it takes 1 or 2 other tries to do that. But you think about a way that they need you to act, and then you tell them that's what you want to do.
Hmm.
And it's just a lot more effective.
Okay. No, that's very helpful. That's very helpful. So I think that one of the things that is going on around the world right now is obviously COVID-19. That there's probably nowhere on earth, maybe except New Zealand, where it hasn't had a huge impact.
Mm.
And one of the things that I've heard is that we're all kind of going through a form of grief. And
Mm.
I just kind of heard that. I don't know the specifics if that's a clinical or how that's kind of noted. Can you kind of break that down a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, Atoma, this is like unprecedented, isn't it? I mean, none of us would have ever imagined that 2020 would be like this. So that's a loss in itself. Some people feel like they've lost a whole year. I
Hmm.
heard a guy the other day say the word 2020 is almost like a curse word right now because of how chaotic this has become. So
Hmm.
certainly we're in a place right now where many of us are experiencing very different kinds of losses.
Hmm.
Certainly, many people in our fellowship have lost friends or loved ones to death. They've died because of it. I lost a very dear colleague of mine early on in the pandemic. So there's that kind of grief where we don't get to go to funerals, you know, just really different. But then there's a lot of other losses, like people lose jobs, and that brings with it all sorts of financial chaos for families. With losing jobs, there's that loss of security, a loss of my meaningfulness in life. When I don't have a job, it's really difficult. Certainly, our children have lost different areas of their school experiences. The seniors in high school last year had a very different graduation process than any of their peers had ever had. So there's those kinds of losses. There's certainly that loss of sense of safety. Am I going to get it? I'm 63 years old. When I go out in the community, I don't know. Somebody could cough on me or whatever, and it could kill me, literally kill me. Um, so there's a lot of different kinds of losses that we have. The loss of predictability. None of us knows what this fall is going to look like. So I think with that, given all those things I just shared, I think the way we help people is to give them, um, man, I've just learned this so much recently. Give them a safe and confidential space to talk. As a society, we are yearning for a place to simply process our lives. So again, instead of trying to fix it for each other, um, try to connect to each other by listening. I do a whole workshop on Jesus. I call it, it's really fun. It's called The Insights of a 12-Year-Old. And it's a story about Jesus at age 12, where, he kind of stayed behind in Jerusalem, and his mom and dad got pretty mad at him and took 3 days to go find him. And they finally found him. And the Bible says in Luke 2:46, it says, when they found Jesus, he was listening to his elders and asking them questions, and they were astonished at his understanding. That's at age 12. So I do a whole workshop called The Insights of a 12-Year-Old. And in that workshop, I talk for about an hour on the skill of listening to each other. And it's a lost art. I mean, I'm telling you, with social media and sound bites, our ability to sit and listen to another person's story is really difficult. So as disciples, man, if we could spend time, God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth, right? If we can spend time listening to people and asking them really good questions that will move the conversation further down the road, it's valuable. I'll tell you one quick story here. I'm a counselor, so most people want me to listen to them, right? And but I'm also a human being that has my own needs and issues and stuff. And there's been a couple times in my life where I thought, man, I've got to talk to somebody for a while. I need somebody that'll listen to me. And I'm kind of cheap, so I won't pay a counselor $90 an hour, although I probably should. But what I've done before is I'll just grab somebody that I feel like is a really safe person. I did this with one of our elders a while back. I said, Wade, I got some things I need to share, get off my heart. I'm going to buy you dinner, but you got to listen to me. He's like, sure. So I'll take him out to a decent restaurant. It might cost me 15 or 20 bucks. And I'll sit there and talk for 2 hours. And every now and then he'll interrupt and say, oh, that reminds me of this. And I'll say, wait, Wade, I've already given you your dinner. You got to listen now. And I walk away from those sessions like a changed man. And when you listen to somebody, it's therapeutic for them.
Mm-hmm.
It really is. It's therapeutic to exchange narratives with one another. But given that person a long enough stretch of time where you don't interrupt, and if you do interrupt, you're simply asking a question that deepens the conversation.
Mm-hmm. No, that's very good. That's very good. I think it definitely is a lost art. And I think when I listen, I know you did a presentation for the New York church with definitely a lot going on. I forget, it's one out of so many people died in New York. It's just really, it's really crazy. So one of the things that I got to thinking is that it's actually good for disciples to mourn and really get in touch with their feelings. And I remember listening to the story that you shared about, losing your mom, and you kind of just shared a little bit about it now, and just getting in touch with your emotions and your feelings and so forth, and how good it was for you. And I guess as I was reading kind of through your bio, just in preparation for our time today, it just meant you just mentioned that this is a passion of yours. So I guess my question is, when you look at the importance of grieving, can you just maybe highlight why it's so important for disciples to grieve, and not just like, amen, but like, why is it important for the soul, I guess is what I'm asking.
Sure, absolutely. Well, a couple thoughts come to my mind. One of the things I talk about at the very beginning of my workshop is either we do grief or grief does us.
Hmm.
Grief has a way of, it's going to infiltrate our lives no matter what we want. So I know people that lost a parent or somebody 20, 30 years ago, and they're still angry and bitter after all these years. So time by itself will not heal wounds. So grief has a way of dealing with us unless we engage it ourselves. So that's one thing I tell people, pay me now or pay me later kind of thing. And certainly, again, Jesus is our best example. He walked right in and he engaged his grief. He didn't wait around for it. He authentically felt his grief. So that's a big thing to tell people right off the bat, is that, if you want to be effective as a disciple and authentic, then you should be dealing with your grief. It's the way Jesus did. It also is very attractive to other people. When I talk about my grief, or I share about my mom or my dad or whatever, that vulnerability is very attractive. I'm attracted to weakness. It's really interesting. Paul, in 1st and 2nd Corinthians, he used the word weakness 12 times. The way Paul connected to people was through weakness. He once said, I am so scared that I'm trembling in front of you guys. So I notice that when I invite people to church or I'm sharing with somebody, when I share in a vulnerable way, they're very connected to me. If I share like, hey, look at me, I'm a strong disciple guy, look how great I am, they're not very attracted to that. So that's one thing. It's just realize that grief is not a weakness. It's actually a strength. And God has vulnerabilities. Somebody once said, Jesus is the vulnerability of God.
Mm-hmm.
God was vulnerable enough to give us his son and see what we did with him, right?
Mm-hmm.
So God's vulnerable. Another thing, though, I think about why we should do it is I believe it honors life. For example, my mom and dad, they were the greatest generation. My dad was a Marine Corps pilot. You know, they came out of the 40s, all that, you know, Depression era, all that stuff. And I felt like after they died, for me just to carry on life without honoring that and talking about it and making sense out of it was really bad. Like in the Old Testament, God spent a lot of time hearkening back to people from ancient times. He does a lot of stuff where he builds memorials on the side of rivers, and he'll say, hey, those rocks there, they represent those 12 tribes of Israel way back. And he'll talk about what those people did. He brings the back history into current stuff. So one of the things, I think it's biblical and it's godly to honor, and when I say honor, what I mean is illustrate or illuminate who those people were in your lives. You know, who were they and what do they mean to you and how did their lives impact you now? And what that's done is really interesting, Atoma. The more I've gone back and realized the power of my parents in my life, the more serious and intentional I am in my children's lives. Because I realize I'm a big history buff, so I read a lot about biographies and people's lives. I realize my own children someday are going to bury me, and they're going to have to deal with kind of like, who was my dad? And so it's for me to look back at the grief that I've gone through with my mom and dad in particular, but other people as well. It makes more sense of my current life. Like it makes me more intentional about who I am. And I want to highlight their work in my life. So I do things that that kind of bring them to light to other people.
Mm-hmm. Is there a sense where it helps convert our soul? And maybe that's too strong of a, maybe there's another way to state that, where it helps us to become more like Christ, not necessarily in just a connection, but it helps us to become more like Jesus as we're really becoming more in touch with like our core. If that, maybe there's another way to state that, but I think you know what I'm saying.
No, I think that's a great question. As a matter of fact, I might steal that from you if that's okay. That
Sure.
idea of converting your soul. We stood in a cemetery just a few days ago to bury my father-in-law's wife, and Atoma, it was humbling to stand there, and you know, we do the casket in the ground and all that, and to realize that in 20 to 30 short years, that's going to be me. And it kind of like brought me back to a realization, like, wow, I'm not going to just drift through this life and then one day be gone. You know, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to make my life count. And especially as disciples, when you say convert the soul, you know, for us to be Jesus in this world here, and that's what we're trying to do. We're not just trying to be good ICOC members. We want to imitate this man Jesus to our neighbors and our friends. To do that, we have to be authentic. And authenticity comes out of the soul. You can't fake being authentic. And people can tell if you're just kind of going through motions, like I'm supposed to invite my neighbors to church, or you know, those kinds of things. They can tell when it's just something you do, but they can also read it when you're authentic. And authenticity is something that I'm really big on. And I think grief allows me to be authentic. I really do. I believe it's more than anything outside of Jesus Christ himself converting me. I think you know, Jesus converted me, and certainly the men and women in my lives who have discipled me over the years that have helped me. But my grief has probably done more to me to help me be authentic than anything I've ever done before.
That's awesome. So last question is, I know right now with everything going on in the world, I know the Denver church has taken a stance as far as what it's going to do in terms of racial reconciliation. And I wanted to know, because you mentioned to mourn with those who mourn. And so I think it's, yes, an individual thing, but I think also societally and as a church, I think there's some things that you guys have done. Can you share a little bit about that?
Oh, you bet. Wow, put me on the spot a little bit there. That's great. No, I mean, boy, I sure do have some thoughts. This, I've been on a journey myself of this for many, many years, but this one has really been like a conversion moment for me as well. I had a very emotional reaction to George Floyd. I got out there, started protesting. I live in a very white neighborhood of Denver, and I gathered like 70 people together. We were out protesting every Monday night for several weeks in a row. We had overwhelming support from a white, like I said, a very white neighborhood. Um, so it's engaged me in a lot of ways. The Denver church has done a lot recently. Probably 5 years ago, we started a diversity committee, and our Black brothers and sisters just didn't feel like they had a voice. And we were doing the February Black History Month, but it just wasn't getting it done. So we started really paying attention to this years ago. One of the things we've done is we've gotten into small groups often, and we do what we call untold stories. And we just, once again, we want to give people space to just share their stories. And for a white guy like me who was born into some privilege, and for me to hear those stories, and for them to hear my story, we assume a white guy is just clueless, but I grew up with some very challenging racial issues in my life. And they when they heard that story, like, I'd never do that about you, Tim. So one thing we do is just these small groups, and we talk to each other, we listen. And there's a phrase that really has hit me. It says, it's amazing how many people have such strong opinions about lives they've never lived.
Mm.
And I thought, oh my gosh, how can I have an opinion about my Black brothers and sisters when I've never lived that life? So my only job is to get in there and say, tell me what your life is like. And I'm just going to shut up and listen. And where appropriate, I apologize. Where if it's appropriate, I've done something wrong. But mostly what they appreciate is somebody will stop and listen to their stories. Because my Black brothers and sisters are also human beings. They've got regular human lives that they live, that need to be honored for what it is, for what it represents. And so when I heard stories, one of the brothers, Alex Haley, he lives in a neighborhood, just regular, middle-class neighborhood kind of thing. He got pulled over for being Black one day in his neighborhood. He got put on a sidewalk in handcuffs, and they wouldn't even tell him why they pulled him. And he said, Tim, you have no idea what it's like to have all your neighbors drive by and see you sitting on a sidewalk in handcuffs for doing nothing, just for the color of my skin. And I thought, you're right, Alex. I have no idea what that's like. Or he said, when I go into a mall, I get followed. I said, Alex, I've never been followed in a mall by a security officer. I have no idea what that's like. So, just to stop long enough and care enough to listen is about 60% of the battle, I think. I think there's also, policy change needs to happen. We need to elect officials that will do that. We need to protest. We need to write letters. But I think in the church, I believe the church is the very best place for this kind of work, because we trust each other. We all sit at the foot of the cross. We have commonalities that go across races that bind us together. So the church, in my mind, I love the work Michael Burns has done. That guy, he's a scholar, but he's well written, and he's awesome. If you can get him out to your church, man. Well, you guys probably had him there. He's
Yeah,
pretty
we've had
close
him.
to you.
That's some time back. Yeah.
Yeah. So we're set up pretty well in the ICOC to work on this stuff. There's no reason why this should not be. The final thing I'd say, there's no reason this should not be in the future our calling card, because I think Michael said only 5% of all evangelical churches are diverse. 5%. He said, that's who we are. He said, this will be our calling card in the coming years, is check out the diversity in this group, and not just look at the diversity, but listen to it. Man, these people get each other.
Mm.
So you got me going there.
No, I think what you said at the end, that you get each other is the key thing, because I wouldn't say it's easy, but it's one thing to have like a whole bunch of people together that are of different races, but they may not necessarily get each other, you know. So
Exactly right. Yep.
yeah, okay. Would you have any books that you can recommend? I know obviously you said Mike Burns. Which ones have you read of his?
So he's got the Crossing the Line.
Yeah.
Is a really good book because it's pretty scholarly. I mean, there's a lot of good history and kind of the systemic racism that goes on, but it's also really good as far as like what to do about it in a church setting. And then he's written a recent one that I have not been able to read yet.
Escaping the Beast.
Yeah, there you go.
That's a good one. That'll like.
Is it? Yeah, he pushes the envelope. He's not afraid to be controversial. He calls out nationalism for what it is.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, those two books, that'll keep your hands full for a while, but then go out and do it. Like,
Yeah.
not just in our church either, man. I tell you what, I had a lot of friends at work and, neighborhoods nearby, just people I work with, that it's really opened up doors to have conversation about. And most of the time they say, no one's ever asked me this before. No one's asked me what's it like. And it's a great way to connect to people as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. If people want to learn more about you and your ministry, how can they go about that?
Yeah, probably the best thing. So I'll just do a quick plug. I travel the world. I visit churches and I do mental health workshops. I do about 7 or 8 on a weekend. So I go in there and I really do a lot of work. But my real passion with that is I help churches create a recovery ministry that's very innovative, very positive, faith-based, Jesus-centered recovery ministry for anybody that has any problems. So we don't just single out the pornography guys or the alcoholics. We don't single that out. We open up to every single person that's got any kind of issue. And then the other thing I do is I leave behind a grief journey training for people to lead groups. So if you want to know more about that, my website is called inmotioncounseling.org.
Okay.
So that's inmotioncounseling.org. And you can find out, you can email me from there. And I'd love to hear from you. I get to connect to thousands of people on this stuff. So it's pretty exciting. Thank you so much, though.
Well, thanks so much for taking time out of your day to share some really helpful things. And definitely, if you like this episode, please consider clicking like and also subscribing for more great content.